Hello, everybody. It's me, the Boss Hog. I read an article today about employees not asking for pay rises because they felt nervous. I thought that was ridiculous. I want to read through the article and talk about how I would go about approaching a pay rise. Let's do it. Okay, so this was the article I was mentioning. Workers would rather make changes to their lifestyle than ask for a pay rise. So this was research that was commissioned by an employee benefits company called Edenred. For me, it's just amazing. I read about this in the newspaper this morning, then I found this article. I just really wanted to walk through it, discuss it, and then discuss my approach for asking for a pay rise. So we're going to go through this one fairly quickly. The Brits would avoid eating out and giving up treats ahead of asking for a pay bump, and you'll see very shortly that the reasons for that is because they feel awkward, 27%, nervous and anxious, 26 and 25% respectively. And it just surprises me that that's the approach, especially because, again, a lot of people are really experiencing restrictions in their standard of living at the moment. So the article now talks about things that people would rather cut back on, like eating out, ditching treats, selling belongings even. There are some things in this article, and by the way, I'll leave a link to it in the below the video. There are some things in this article that I think make sense. At the bottom of it, there's like a top 30 money saving tips, and I would say 3/4 of them are pretty sensible. At any time, you can always reduce your costs to moderately improve your situation. But really, the main way to improve your situation is to get more money, because again, you can multi-bag your income, but you can only ever reduce your cost by 100%, and typically that's impossible. So yeah, I just think it's extremely surprising. I would also point out that this article talks about the 1 in 4 people who are nervous and anxious, but actually like there are other reasons why people don't ask for pay rises, and typically in my experience and previous work I've researched on, you're looking at about 50-50 typically that don't. And again, this article then explains, but even of the 44% who have asked for a salary increase, so okay, some people are feeling nervous, but presumably here there's another 30% of people who are feeling something about it, right? Even if it's not nerves, maybe they just don't want to, don't need to, etc. I'm not sure. 30% didn't get one. I mean, another way to put this is 70% did get one, right? So I think, again, this is an interesting way of looking at it. And again, it also emerged half, 56%, have already made lifestyle adjustments to cut back on their outgoings as the cost of living crisis starts to bite. So yeah, even that where people aren't nervous, less than half of people are actually asking for a salary increase. However, those that do, 70% get one. Again, I'll talk in a second, once my face is back on the screen, about my opinion of why people might not get them and what to do if you can't get one. So yeah, I mean, there's some recommendations here about cost saving habits. Again, I think a lot of them make sense. Things like using leftovers, eating less takeaway, and eating out less is quite expensive at the moment, so that's always an option. You can work more hours or take a second job. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. Obviously, it just depends how much that second job is paying you, and you want to be mindful about the fact that you don't want to just be existing, right? You want to be living. And to me, like, you shouldn't take a second job if you can negotiate something with one job, and hopefully improve your career as well. I mean, this part here was amazing to me. A fifth have borrowed money this year, such as via a loan. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether this is a fifth of those that were asked, or a fifth of people in general, or whether it was a fifth of those that feel nervous. It's not exactly clear to me. But again, I mean, you're talking about a situation here where you're making yourself worse off over time, right? Debt compounds in the same way that investment does. And with the base rate going up, that's only going to get more expensive. So to me, you're basically disadvantaging yourself for your own inconvenience and nervousness effectively, and ultimately for the benefit of your employer, who has their costs reduced because you're not prepared to ask for more money. So that's pretty crazy for me. Okay, borrowing money for home renovations might have a good purpose. I don't think there's anything wrong with debt if you're investing that debt, and part of that could be to better your home, potentially to sell it one day, or maybe just to improve your home. I think that can be okay. Bills, I always think, is a problem because ultimately you're just making yourself worse off, right? That's compounding. There are things you can do to manage many of your bills, and I would suggest that you literally start just by writing to people and saying, "I'm really sorry, this is my financial situation. Can we set up a payment plan?" And most companies will work with you constructively to do that. And the worst case scenario, those companies will take you to court, and as long as you're being fair, the judge will actually make those companies. And this might sound very hypothetical, but when my father got ill, he had multiple sclerosis. My parents were fairly indebted, and my mum went through this whole process, and over the better part of 20 years, paid back like £5 a week to various creditors that they owed money to, and that was what the court agreed. So it is what it is. And by the way, in all but one case, my mum wasn't taken to court. The companies worked constructively because they'd rather get some money coming in than none, right? That's going to be the approach. And no company wants to appear in media for having been mean when you didn't have money. So be mindful about what you're spending, and again, don't put your head in the sand and not confront it, even though sometimes that's an easy thing to do. I think these is okay. Like, even though I'm not exactly on the breadline, like my finances are also under pressure at the moment. I've found my food shopping is really expensive. My electricity bill has really gone up a lot. Those kind of things. So I would actually say feelings of concern. I'm surprised it's actually this low. But again, there are things that you can do sensibly to address that, and part of that should really be trying to improve your income by asking for more money or etc. And there is some signs of confidence here, but we'll see how that shapes out. And yeah, I mean, this one's also interesting for me as well, right? 34% don't feel informed or educated enough, right? So, well, okay, what are you going to do to address that, right? That's 1 in 3 people. Okay, read up, right? Google or go down to your local library. Like that, those things have free resources, even if you genuinely can't afford to get online, which doesn't seem too likely in most cases. I mean, like if I think about the UK as an example, like if you have a problem with your employer, there's a free service called ACAS, which is available. I've actually used it once personally beforehand to ask questions about whether my employer had to pay me for jury service. There were some questions about overtime and things like that. Again, I got an answer on the same day. And likewise, my wife had a very serious incident where a previous employer tried to make her redundant while she was on maternity leave, which is pretty difficult to do, to put it mildly. And again, super helpful free service. So, and likewise, so if you're having problems with your employer and you think that they're being unfair, you don't have to push that nuclear option immediately, right? You can get yourself informed. What are my rights here? Can my employer, for example, ask me not to discuss salary, or is that legally acceptable? Now, I don't know what the situation is in other countries, but there likely is resources that are available to support you. And likewise, maybe it's something like budgeting or bills. There's something likewise in the UK called Citizen Advice Bureau. There's all kinds of options you can explore in terms of if you're struggling financially. Citizen Advice is likewise free of charge as well, and they'll literally, what it says on the tin, right? They'll help you from like budgeting. Maybe some people don't have the life skill to budget, to like helping you go through a process of maybe entering a CVA, so a credit to voluntary agreement. Which is more or less how I described, like writing to the companies that you owe money to and things like that. So there are free resources that are available, and to me, it's kind of like if you're struggling, I do understand that it can be difficult to confront that, but you're not helping yourself by not confronting it, right? And yeah, I mean, 18% surveyed felt their salary is keeping pace with cost of living increases. I'm not surprised by that number at all. You're talking about inflation running at 10% at the moment, and not too many people are experiencing 10% pay rises. And even if you are getting a 10% pay rise, you're just trading water effectively, right? So I do agree actually with this last part, which is from Eden Red, right? The challenge for employers is to get more money into their people's pockets, but a pay rise isn't the only way to achieve this. So I guess actually like the challenge here, like employers, and we'll touch on this a little bit more, they're not really thinking about getting more money into your pocket. Like that's not how employers think, right? We should be really mindful of the beast that we're dealing with here, right? It's capitalism, self-interested companies. That isn't really what they're doing. What they're interested in is keeping their costs low and producing the best that they can and building those margins, right? They've got shareholders to pay, they've got bills to pay like anyone else, and they want to achieve the best that they can. But I do agree that employers do have a wide range of options available, and this is something that you as an employee should be mindful of, because that there are different approaches to getting a pay rise. Maybe you can get other benefits instead, and those will be very helpful. So something I've been seeing a lot in London recently is to encourage workers back into the office. Some employers have started to introduce a sort of a lunch stipend, basically, where if you go into the office and you're working, you get like 10 to 20 quid food allowance per day, right? And that's a stipend rather than a benefit. So basically, you just have a card, like an employee card. You put it on there. There's no tax implications. It's very efficient. So you can have lunch, and that does add up over time. If you think about sort of 20 quid a day for 20 days an average month, that's £400 post-tax benefit basically per month. So £5 grand a year. So those are the sort of things that you can start to think about, like whether an employer has those options. And we'll talk about some of the other options as well. So just to conclude this article, these are the top 10 things, top 30 things that workers would rather do than ask for a pay rise. I think most of these are honestly sensible. So yeah, like I said, I'll put a link in here. I won't spend too much time. Some of them are a bit eyebrow raising, like use less toilet roll. Like I can't see that making too much difference. Take fewer showers, maybe to a point, but I mean a shower is already more efficient than a bath. And there are some other good ones here as well. Like this is probably my favorite in terms of like face palming. Like soap can be pretty cheap. You can get it from about 50p. Definitely don't pay more than £1 for a hand soap, right? That lasts for a reasonable amount of time. And if you're using one pump instead of two, it's pennies, right? At this point, I know some people kind of are pretty close to the breadline, but honestly, this isn't going to make a huge difference at all. It's almost ridiculous. So that one did make me chuckle and facepalm a little bit. So anyway, tell me what you think about this article. I'm curious and the kind of position in general. But without further ado, I'm going to talk through my approach to asking for pay rises. I have asked for pay rises. I do have some opinions, and I think we should do it now. Let's do it. Okay, so you get me back again. Hello, everybody. So we're going to go through this. I've got 7 points I want to talk through. So, this should be self-explanatory, I think. I almost can't believe I'm having to say this, but obviously there are a significant number of people out there that maybe need to hear it. So don't let nerves, anxiety, or fear, or really anything else stop you from asking for more money, right? Ultimately, that is an unrelated thing. Sometimes it can be difficult to have those kind of conversations, but sometimes they need to be had. I remember once, very early in my career, I got like a pay rise, and it was like a 5% pay rise, going from I think it was 21,000 to 23,000, so I guess closer to 10%. And the thing is in a way, like that's okay, but it didn't feel fair to me once I'd sat on it. And the way that it was done is it was basically, I got like glowing feedback, Liam, you've done great in your first year. Here's an envelope, we think it's a good offer, etc. And I just basically accepted it, didn't even look at it in the meeting. Probably very deliberate approach from that employer. And then when I opened it, I was like, it's nice to get that pay rise, but I was like, oh, hang on a sec, like I've made my company like 2/3 this year, and I'm getting 2,000. That didn't really feel very fair. And I basically I thought about it, and I slept on it, spoke with a few people just to sort of say, what's the approach here, read up a little bit. And I think 2 days later, I sent an email to my boss and just said, dear boss, I'm really sorry, I've been sleeping on this. It's gotten to me a little bit, to be honest with you, and I think I'm worth a little bit more money. Like, is it okay if we have a conversation about this? And to be like, how you exactly phrase it is up to you and your relationship with your boss and everything else. But to me, I think it's important not to ambush your boss, right? They want to prepare as well, depending on exactly how senior you are, who they are, and how senior they are. That they might not be able to give you an immediate answer, and it's not fair to ambush them with a difficult HR conversation, right? So just sort of explain your situation. For me personally, I always benefit just writing difficult things down first of all. If I need to have a conversation, dear boss, I need to have a chat about X, do you have time for it, right? So they can prepare, they can maybe sleep on it and find a good slot where they can devote time to you if they're a good manager. And instead of their normal BAU jobs, business as usual, their day-to-day jobs. So I think that's important as well. But don't let any fear or worry of a difficult conversation stop you from having that difficult conversation. I would say you treat it objectively, right? Take out the emotions. It can be a difficult conversation to have, but what you want to do is be prepared, be researched, be almost cold, right? Don't let a difficult conversation kind of fluster you. What you should have in advance of sending off that email is things like having a look at what similar positions, similar job descriptions are paying, right? So go on job websites, find links, print off examples, and that's literally what I did. Dear boss, this site is just down the road, it's paying another 6,000 on top of that, I think I'm worth that, basically, right? So like make it clear. There are two things about doing that. First of all, it kind of reinforces to you that you're not being unreasonable. I think that's important. You need to make sure that you're speaking from confidence and have belief that you're genuinely worth that. And secondly, as well, there's kind of an implicit threat here that doesn't need to be said, which is if I don't get this money, I know I can get more money elsewhere, right? And again, you don't need to say that. There's no need to be threatening here. Don't sort of give yourself an ultimatum, right? Do not say, if I don't get this, I'm going to be quitting, right? That's just needlessly confrontational. And also it kind of puts you in a difficult position, because if you don't get a pay rise and then don't leave, you've just lost all of your credibility, right? Doesn't need to be said. Any non-idiot can read between those lines, and fine. So, first of all, you've got real reasons as to why you think you should be paid more compared to what's available in the industry and at that position. Secondly, hopefully you've got performance feedback, right? Like it is helpful if you work in job roles where you save money or make money, and those things can be quantitatively measured. Like that's why salespeople have such an ease getting pay rises, but actually it's also much easier to get rid of a salesperson for underperformance, right? For me, I work in billing, but part of that is about revenue assurance, maximizing sales that should be being made, reducing fraud, reducing other costs in terms of like making fewer errors, so companies and individuals have less reason to contact us, right? Each contact costs money. So I have a way of very easily saying, well, last year I reduced 20% propensity to contact, right? And each one of those contacts is costed by us at £4 a call, right? So therefore this is my contribution to the business. If you can do that, it's fantastic, because it's very easy for then the business to say, oh, hang on, that person's benefiting us this much, maybe we should give them a bit more money. Not everyone has that situation. I would say roles around support can be very difficult to make that argument. But again, try and get hold of data, right? Make connections with your business intelligence team or your reporting team. See if you can get hold of data that puts you in a good light. Likewise, if you have performance reviews where you're scoring very highly, remind the business of that, right? You told me just 2 days ago that I was doing a great job. A £2,000 salary rise doesn't feel like that really is that. So there are different ways to do this, right? But again, try to stay calm and rational, and think of it from the business's perspective as well, right? That's ultimately it. Dear business, I bought in this much benefit, therefore I think I'm worth this, right? And ultimately then it's like a business decision for the business to make. So yeah, that I think is worth doing. This also, again, it's kind of linked to the previous one, but feels important to say at this moment. Even if you are feeling hardship, and that's the only reason why you were brave enough to ask for a pay rise, don't ask for a pay rise because you're feeling skin, right? And I'm going to be cold and brutal here as both an employee and somebody who hires people. It doesn't matter, right? Like from a business's perspective, as long as you're able to perform your job, they don't really care that you're having to cut back on going to the hairdressers or eating out. It's honestly none of their concern until though that cutback genuinely affects your performance. The business doesn't care. And even then, like as long as your performance is at a certain level to basically be worth whatever they're paying you, they're still not going to care until you really start underperforming because you can't pay the bills and you're having to work an extra job, so you're exhausted, right? It honestly doesn't matter. So you need to approach this from the perspective of I'm worth more money, not I deserve more money or I need more money, right? Again, that doesn't matter. I'm worth more money because I'm bringing in this benefit into your business, and therefore this is my rationale. And implicitly, if I don't get that, look what I can get elsewhere for a very similar job, right? That's ultimately it. So don't link it to your personal situation. It doesn't matter. And by doing so, you bring back emotions, right? It feels like a guilt trip. It's very easy for an employer to say, well, actually, it's not our responsibility to pay your bills. And it's really not, right? Their responsibility is to exchange your service or what you're providing for money. The rest of it is up to you, how you then manage that money, right? Ultimately, what you're trying to argue for here is that your service that you're offering them is worth more than they're paying you, and here's why. So it's a very rational conversation. Again, I touched on this previously in the article, but you need to understand that employers have a duty of care. Literally, like it's an employer's job, like that company's job, to enhance shareholder value. That's really what the business is there for, right? And whether that shareholders are public, including me as an investor, or whether it's like private, like as a limited company, it's their job to make money for their owners, right? And one of the best ways to make money is to reduce costs. And especially in certain companies and industries, one of the main cost drivers is people. So if I can reduce my costs, then great. And I also want to be clear here, like some managers have a personal benefit in paying you as little as possible, right? So they'll literally get bonuses if they can reduce costs in their area. And again, so it's like not only does the company as a whole look at all of these costs and look at their people resource, and if you're working like as an accountant or as an engineer in a dedicated company, employee costs can be like 50 to 70% of your overall costs, right? That's a rare example. But again, more technical industries or more niche industries in terms of professional services have extremely high wage bills. And if they can cut back or even on a few percent, that will make a big difference to their bottom line. So, but beyond that, right? So that's your employee, your employer, the company as a whole. But again, people managers have budgets as well. So what used to happen is when I had like a fairly large department, let's say my department was being paid £500,000, right? I had 10 people, they were paid 50 grand each, okay? That wasn't the situation, but let's just take that as a nice round number. I would get given, say, 5% increase in salary for those people. So I had 25 grand to split between 10 people. Now, of course, you could just take a very easy approach and pay everyone 2,500, give them all a 5% pay rise, and they may or may not be happy. But actually, I used to divide it how I thought was best. And sometimes in some years I didn't actually spend all of the money that I was given. Actually, never because I had a personal reason to benefit from it. I just didn't feel like there was a reason to do it. And then in other years, I felt like actually somebody in my team had really, maybe they'd gained a professional qualification, or maybe they'd really excelled, and I was asking for more money. So there I was trying to be fair with my employer as well as my team. But I have in the past sort of made quite significant differences in who I was rewarding. And part of my consideration for that is, well, I need to pay that person more because they've told me that they're not happy and that they're going to be leaving. Whereas that person over there, who's just as valuable to the company, they haven't asked me for any more money. And I think that I can keep them happier without having to pay them money, right? So it's like, well, hang on a sec. Like if you're being a happy employee who's not asking for more money, you're going to get overlooked, right? It's just like you shouldn't, in a way, that's me and the company as a whole, like taking you for granted, and you shouldn't allow that. But you also shouldn't be angry with it because you need to understand where people like me and the company are coming from. So again, treat it emotionlessly. Yes, it can be tempting to get upset or angry, but don't. Like that's not going to be conducive to anything. So not just when you join a company, but even when you're there, right? Just approach. These are lessons that you can use even while you're fully employed, and I think it's just worth bearing in mind. I think this is something that needs to be said as well. It will be a fairly common answer to have, well, sorry, but the employer has no money currently. Like, first of all, I would suggest that as part of your research, you understand whether the company does have money or not, right? If they're a private company, they're likely to be, I mean, we have Companies House in the UK, right? It's a limited company. Find out. Even if they're a sole trader and they're not having to do that, you can look at things like, if you have access to P&L, any budget, again, talk to people in those departments. You can usually build relationships to sort of get some information. Even if they don't have much money, or even if they're actually loss making as a business, if you've done a good enough argument and you're saying, listen, I've brought in this much revenue or reduced costs by this much, you are still worth money to that business and they should be keeping you. So ultimately, if you leave, the business is in a worse shape. So don't accept that, basically. I think it's not a very good argument for the business to make. It's kind of irrelevant. It's in a way, it's like you bringing in your personal situation, right? It's like the business bringing in their situation. It frankly doesn't matter. And I mean, you can be quite blunt here. Again, don't be emotional, just be firm. And it's a case of, well, actually, I'm bringing value to this business. I get that there are challenges in the business right now, but ultimately the business is better because I'm here, and therefore it doesn't change the argument that I'm making, right? Like that's it. Like you need to be firm and strong and make that argument. I think that's all I can say on that. There are other things that you could think about. Actually, when I renegotiated after I got this letter and then thought about it, right? First of all, I got put up to 26, which I was a bit happier with. But I also agreed that they would put me on a CIMA course, which is like an accountancy qualification. So that's worth like several £1,000s. It's very efficient from a company's perspective because they can claim VAT back on it and other benefits as well. So it doesn't cost them as much as it benefits me. So that's always a very conducive thing. And especially if you're more in like the foundational part of your career, that can be a very powerful thing to do, right? So, as part of this, basically, I'd only been at that company for a year. We agreed that the course would be fully funded, that as long as I stayed there for another 18 months minimum, And that was the end of it. And for me, that was like absolutely fine. Like I'd rather not have moved away. The company was nice. I just felt like I was worth a bit more money. And to be credit to the company, like they heard me out, and we came to. I actually wanted 28. So they said 26 plus a $2,000 course, right? We're still, Liam, like, yeah, okay, there's been some improvements that have been made, but ultimately we're not quite at that level yet. So I said, okay. And, that's a good way to approach it. So this should be, again, like a calm, constructive conversation where you're airing the reasons, maybe the business has some reasons. And by the way, if one of the reasons why is well, we can see you've made great progress but we don't think you're at the level of 28k yet, say, okay, understood, what do I need to do to get there, right? And literally ask for them to give you a development plan. I've done this with people I've worked with before, and it can be very powerful. Like, well, okay, so currently you're on 22, this is how you get to 24, 26, 28, and 30, right? Maybe that's a reasonable number of steps. So it can be like, and that then gets the business kind of in a situation where, again, there's a very clear relationship here between the value that you're bringing, that could be experience or qualifications or etc. Right? Maybe it's a work project, like, once you deliver that new platform and it's operationally stable, we agree that will be a really good result for the business and we'll look at your salary there. But ideally, as part of that, I would make them sort of commit to it in writing. Here's a development plan, and then you can literally work through it, right? So as soon as you've done those things that got you 28k, great, you can go and take it up with them. So again, it's a very clear conversation about the value that you're bringing to the business, what the business wants you to do, and it's a good way of developing as a person. And you can then sort of have like monthly conversations with your boss. How do you think we're going on those tasks, so that the next time that you're having these conversations, again, you can be objective. Well, 3 months ago you told me that you were really pleased with the output of that project. As you can see here, by delivering that project, you said I would get X. I believe that condition has now been met. We go from there, right? And again, a reasonable employer will meet their obligations. I do appreciate that some employers are much more scummy, and obviously there's only so much you can do with people who break commitments and etc. Again, talk to ACAS and sort of free resource if that situation does happen. I guess I've been fortunate enough that I haven't had that situation, right? Like I have had to have difficult conversations, but once an agreement's been met, the employers that I've had have met those commitments. So that's been, I guess, positively reaffirming. Maybe some people have less positive experiences, and I guess I can only apologize for that. And maybe the last point here is where we need to go to. And honestly, change jobs. You shouldn't be giving your life to a company that doesn't value you. And ultimately, a company can give you platitudes and warm words, but your real worth to the company, make no mistakes, is what they pay you. And again, that can be literal pay. It can be things like development, pension contributions, other benefits that might matter. Even things like flexible working can be hugely valuable to certain people at certain stages of their life, right? And again, if you're working with an employer who doesn't value you, if you've been reasonable in your asks, you're a good employee, you genuinely can get another job that pays you 20%, 30% more, you should change jobs. Absolutely. You shouldn't be prepared to put up with crap. And like I have had one situation where I literally needed to hand my notice in. Before then, suddenly I got conversations about a very significant pay increase, right? And it's like, it shouldn't really come to that. I did actually accept the counter offer, and I sort of regretted it afterwards, because I felt like I'd passed up on a better opportunity, and I was only at that company very briefly as well. So just be mindful. But again, that can be a way to really focus the company, because again, the company probably made a calculation that they could pay me less and that I wasn't going to leave. And as soon as they found out that calculation was mistaken, they were prepared to revisit what they were paying me, right? Shouldn't come to that, but again, some companies, they're typically having those conversations. Can I get away with not giving that person as much money as they probably can get elsewhere? How likely are they to leave? And if that calculation is not especially, that may be a risk they're prepared to take. So, if you're sitting there quietly because you're too nervous, too anxious, or anything else to ask for a pay rise, then it's not going to work for you. But again, at the same time, if you've done everything right, there will be a small number, I believe, but there will certainly be some employers who will still take advantage of you, and you really don't want to be around toxic employers, right? They do definitely exist, unfortunately. I don't think most employers are especially toxic. I think most of them want to work with you and are actually like managers and people who are managing you personally. are quite happy on the whole to see you progress, to see you grow, right? They hired you potentially for a reason, or that maybe they came in and took over your team and they've worked with you. For me personally, I love seeing people develop, right? Fewer things make me happier as a manager than when somebody can demonstrate that they deserve more money. Like that's absolutely something I'll fight for you for. But yeah, I need to be convinced. You need to convince me. Ultimately, then we need to convince the business. A good business will work with you to develop you and get better resource ultimately. And if you're not with one of those companies, or your boss is terrible and isn't facilitating that relationship, you need to change jobs. And very worst case scenario, if there's no jobs in your location, in your industry, if you're a coal miner in the middle of Wales, maybe you need to consider changing jobs, right? And again, that's not an easy process. I don't want to kind of belittle people in difficult situations, but you don't help yourself by not having these conversations and not confronting reality at the end of the day. And if the reality is that you're not going to get anywhere because your employer is rubbish, change employer. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about this video, this article that I read, my personal experiences and my advice more generally. Hopefully this has been useful. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I've been the Boss Hog, and good luck asking for pay rises. Bye for now.